Before diving into this incredible story, consider subscribing to the channel and hitting the bell. Every story here has something to say, and you won't want to miss a single one. Grace Wilson had everything she needed to be happy: a husband she believed loved, an elegant house in a leafy Atlanta neighborhood, and above all, dreams filled her heart. Simple, deep, powerful dreams. She imagined children's laughter echoing in the hallways, little footsteps hurrying on the polished hardwood floor, and chubby arms closing around her neck on Christmas mornings. She wanted a family, not to fill a void, but because she had so much love to give. But sometimes life takes cruel turns. Sometimes it breaks the most sincere hearts for no apparent reason. And sometimes, the invisible scars it leaves don't heal over time. They simply dig deeper into the flesh until we learn to live with them. At 27, Grace still harbored the romantic illusion that true love could conquer all. She shared her life with Matthew Coleman, a man who shone in society. Ambitious, elegant, always using the right words in public, he already gravitated around the circles of power, and his name circulated in business circles like a rising star. With him, Grace thought she had found her companion, her pillar, her future. They often talked about their future children. They had even chosen names. Eden for a girl, Miles for a boy. They imagined themselves as parents, young and energetic, taking their children to the park on Saturday mornings, attending school plays, planning family summers on the East Coast. But after months of fruitless attempts, their enthusiasm turned to worry, and this worry gradually became an obsession. The medical examinations began. Each month became a test, each silence of the body a slap in the face. Grace consulted, returned, and started again. Her hormone levels, her ovaries, her uterus were analyzed, but the results remained unclear, the causes undefined. A gray area, an absence of answers. At first, Matthew was patient. He offered lip service, but his eyes were tinged with an unease he couldn't hide. Over time, he became more withdrawn, harder, less tender. It was no longer terrified. It had become some burden to her. Social pressure added to the silent tension of their daily lives. Matthew's mother, a dry woman with rigid manners, had never really liked Grace. She told her, in half words, "A woman worthy of the name gives an heir." Matthew, on the other hand, was drifting away. He came home late, only touched Grace out of duty, and locked himself in his office for hours. He was running away from the problem, and Grace with him. Then, one pouring rainy evening, everything gave way. They had just returned from a tense dinner at a friend's house, where yet another remark about the children had sent a chill through the air. In the living room, still in their coats, soaked and tired, the exchange exploded. "You don't understand," she cried, her voice trembling. "It's not my fault. I'm doing everything I can." Matthew looked at her coldly. Her face, once so gentle, had become a statue of contempt. "You're sterile, Grace. You can't give me what I want. I'm wasting my time." The sentence fell like a blade. She felt the air leave her lungs. She wanted to speak, cry, scream, but nothing came out. He looked at her one last time and went up to their room, as if the sentence had been pronounced. 2 weeks later, he was gone. Less than a year later, social media revealed that Matthew had remarried a popular interior designer, who was apparently 6 months pregnant at the time of their wedding. The photos poured in. Perfect smile, white dress over a rounded belly, Matthew radiant. And Grace? She didn't cause a scene. She didn't send hateful messages. She didn't beg. She quietly packed her bags, sold the house, and moved away. Atlanta had become a graveyard of memories, a theater of humiliation. She chose to disappear, not out of weakness, but to survive. She settled in a small town in Colorado, far from the noise, the judgments, and above all, from everything that had been sullied. There, among the mountains, the silent trees and the cold wind, she undertook something Matthew had never known how to do: rebuild. What no one knew, not even those who saw her disappear from Atlanta, was that Grace had never stopped loving children. That dream, to mother, to raise, to pass on, hadn't died with Matthew's departure. It had simply changed shape. Because despite the pain, despite the silences that surrounded her, despite the cruel words thrown at her like judgment, Grace had not let herself be consumed by bitterness. She could have become bitter, withdrawn, cynical, but she had chosen another path. A quieter, slower, but infinitely stronger path, that of resilient love. One winter day, while leafing through a local newspaper in the lobby of a small library in Colorado, her eyes fell on a classified ad. Urgent call for adoption. 3-year-old girl of Haitian origin, with no known family, waiting for a stable home. The name wasn't mentioned, but Grace felt, in that strange moment, a resonance. A call both gentle and firm. An intuition that became self-evident. A few weeks later, she welcomed Naomi. Small, fearful, her eyes wide open to a world she didn't understand. She had known abandonment, instability, and loss. But in Grace's arms, for the first time, Naomi felt the warmth of unconditional love. And Grace discovered a profound truth. You can love a child you never carried as if it had grown in your own flesh. Naomi was the first, but not the last. 3 years later, Grace adopted 2 African-American twins, Elijah and Emmanuel. 2 6-year-old boys, taken from an abusive home where shouting was more common than smiling. When they arrived at Grace's, they barely spoke. They had learned to be wary of everything. But little by little, with patience, tenderness, and structure, Grace taught them safety, trust, the right to be vulnerable. Then, a few years later, she opened her door to Aisha. Aisha was 15, too old for traditional adoption agencies, too broken for anyone to commit. She drifted from foster home to foster home, having known the sidewalks, the dirty hands, the predatory stares, the broken promises. When she arrived at Grace's, she didn't want to talk. She had no faith in anything. But Grace didn't back down. She saw in Aisha a version of her own grief, pent-up anger, a deep crack. She didn't force anything. She let her breathe, exist, rebuild at her own pace. And little by little, a bond was woven. Strong, indestructible. Grace may not have carried these children in her womb, but she had carried them all in her heart, in her arms, in her sleepless nights, in her silent prayers. She had healed their wounds, calmed their nightmares, and rekindled in their eyes a light that life had tried to extinguish. But she didn't stop there. Over the years, Grace had become a quiet but strong pillar of her new community. She taught child psychology at the local university, with a passion fueled as much by books as by field experience. Her classes were full of authenticity, compassion, and quiet wisdom. She founded a shelter for young orphans and abandoned adolescents. She wanted not only to save her own children, but to open the door to others, many others who were invisible and forgotten by the system. She created an educational support program, resilience workshops, and partnerships with therapists, former teachers, and artists. Grace became, without seeking it, a reference, an example, a gentle force. For 20 years, she gave everything: love, values, education, discipline, cultural roots. She taught her children the beauty of their origins, pride in their heritage, and the strength of dignity. She never promised them a just world, but she gave them the tools to face it with intelligence and integrity. And they grew up, each in their own way, each with their struggles, their dreams, their talents. And together, they formed a family that nothing and no one could deny. On a sweltering June evening, the gilt of Atlanta's Ritz-Carlton gleamed under the spotlights of a prestigious gala. The 25th anniversary of Coleman Enterprises, an empire built on contracts, political alliances, and carefully cultivated relationships. At the helm of this colossal undertaking, Matthew Coleman, always elegant, always dominant. He entered the Ritz's great hall like a king in his court, dressed in a tailored black tuxedo, his gold watch gleaming discreetly beneath his sleeve. He greeted the notables, exchanging firm handshakes and calculated smiles. But behind the smooth exterior, he was no longer quite the man of old. The years had taken their toll. His temples were graying, his features were harder, and his tired eyes betrayed a void that neither power nor money could fill. His 2 sons, once displayed in the glossy pages of family magazines, were absent. The eldest, Julian, in rehab after a high-profile overdose, and the youngest, Marcus, exiled to Dubai following a financial scandal involving bribery and offshore accounts. Despite everything, Matthew smiled, because tonight was supposed to be his triumph. The room shimmered with 1,000 lights. A jazzy band played softly near the buffet. Conversations mingled in a hushed hum, until an unexpected commotion seized the main entrance. All eyes turned. The murmur fell silent, and the air suddenly seemed thicker. A figure entered, straight, luminous, wrapped in an ivory satin gown that caught the light like a star. Grace. Her carriage was regal, but not arrogant. She walked slowly, with the quiet confidence one can only acquire by going through pain and emerging with dignity. Her elegantly styled hair, her frank gaze, her fluid gait, everything about her radiated a profound strength. Beside him walked 4 beautiful young adults, all black, all radiant. Naomi, stunning in a burgundy dress, known statewide for her powerful advocacy and fight for racial justice. Elijah, in a sober suit, with a solid build, an emergency room doctor in Chicago, specializing in crisis intervention. Emmanuel, more discreet, but whose calm presence commanded respect. A prodigious pianist, his concerts were sold out in Paris, Tokyo, and Johannesburg. Aisha, in a black suit, proud, upright, founder of an NGO for survivors of domestic violence, recently recognized by the United Nations. They didn't need to say a word. Their presence spoke for themselves. And at that moment, the fallen king recognized the queen he had lost. Matthew froze, feeling his hand tremble. His champagne glass slowly slipped from his fingers and shattered on the floor with a sharp, clear, almost symbolic clink. He approached, slowly, as if passing through a dream or a nightmare. "Grace? Is that you?" he said, his voice broken, almost childish. She looked at him. No anger, no revenge, just a formidable peace. A peace built on 20 years of work, love, resilience. "Yes, Matthew, it's me, and these are my children." He blinked in disbelief. His mouth moved hesitantly. "But you said that you couldn't have children." Grace smiled softly, a sad smile, but unwavering. "You are right. I did not give life with my body, but I raised souls with my love." Then his gaze darkened just a little, just enough for the truth to sink in. "And you, Matthew, what have you done with those you created?" The silence that followed was sharper than a verdict. A heavy silence. Brutal. It spoke volumes more than any speech. Around them, the guests looked away, embarrassed. Some whispered. Others stared at Grace in admiration. Even the waiters seemed suspended in time. Matthew took a step back. This wasn't his party anymore. This wasn't his throne anymore. True greatness had just walked into the room, and it bore the name of a woman he had once broken, but which he had never known how to destroy. That evening, fate changed sides. As the gala drew to a close, the champagne glasses emptied, and the musicians packed up their instruments. The journalists present, first intrigued, then fascinated, had eyes only for Grace Wilson and the 4 imposing figures surrounding her. No official statement could match the silent power of this apparition. The next morning, all the local headlines, and even some national ones, showed the same image: Grace, standing, surrounded by Naomi, Elijah, Emmanuel, and Aisha, heads held high, eyes serene, united in a soft light that seemed purposefully captured by fate itself. A pure shot. Raw. Authentic. The title was simple, but devastating. A mother's strength. Love stronger than blood. In cafes, lounges, waiting rooms, and even boardrooms, the story spread. People talked about this woman who had been labeled sterile, rejected, erased, and who, 20 years later, was returning to the light with children built not of flesh, but of soul and loyalty. And while the press celebrated this unexpected return, Matthew Coleman was discovering another truth, more bitter, more silent. At home, in his oversized villa, facing a mirror where his reflection suddenly seemed foreign, he replayed the scene over and over again. He understood, too late, that real sterility was not what one diagnoses in a clinic. It was that of the heart, that of pride, that of a man incapable of loving other than through what others validated. He had founded an empire, but he had proven incapable of building a family. He had children, but no connection. Heirs, but no emotional legacy. What he had sown was only disillusionment, competition, and emptiness. And at the height of his success, he was alone. Grace, however, never saw him again. She felt neither desire nor curiosity. For her, that chapter had long since closed. She harbored neither vengeance nor resentment. It wasn't her personal victory she savored. It was the victory of a different worldview. A gentle, calm victory based on giving, ethics, and reparation. That evening, Grace was no longer the abandoned, wounded woman, reduced to a medical label. She became a living symbol, that of resilience. From chosen motherhood, unconditional love that transcends blood, biological laws, social norms. She was proof that one can rise from ruins and build a palace with the stones thrown at us. She was, for her children and for so many other invisible ones, the most beautiful definition of the word mother. And in the hearts of those who had attended that evening, a truth had become indelibly anchored. Greatness is not in what one has, but in what one raises.